up and welcome to the Temple of Bleh. The Roadrunner podcasts are slowly dying out in favour of the documentary, which is completely fine. I've got about 3 more of those to edit, so if you are listening to this and you'd be meaning to get in touch to talk about Roadrunner, I'm calling time, it's last orders. Actually, I wouldn't turn you down, I'm just, I'm not actively pursuing it because I'm doing that through the documentary, so, hey-o. Anyway, this is a conversation with my good mate, Petrol Bastard. I've known John and Ben for a good long fucking time now. Petrol Bastard is a punk band. It's like an electronic punk band. We talk about how we kind of delineate and compartmentalize the genre into the conversation. But I want to recommend everyone just go onto Spotify and look for the very worst of Petrol Bastard. That'll give you a kind of a sense of the sound, but also understand that the live show is a completely different spectacle. Now, I think we opened the conversation by saying they're kind of like Morecambe and Wise punk, and that's kind of an old reference for English comedy fans, I guess. Anyway, 1, 2, fuck it up. Cheers for joining me, because I've been trying to speak to you, both of you, like socially for about 2 years, but we're all so fucking busy that the only time you will speak to me socially is if it's for an official Petrol Bastard engagement.
And we're not very sociable people anyway.
Yeah, we've been trying to not speak to you socially for 2 years.
You bastards. But yeah, no, I honestly just want to shoot the shit because there's so many things that are like sort of where we've gone in terms of directions and things that we've been doing for the last like 2 years have sort of diverged so immensely and greatly, and our understanding of each other's worlds has probably completely changed. Especially if you think about from like the Volatile Gentleman days, when Petrol Bastard just started, from when we did that first interview where you were talking about how you weren't drinking anymore to now. I think there's like loads of different things that we could just sort of talk about over like a coffee or something. But again, you guys won't have it. It has to be PR for fucking Petrol Bastard, or it's not worth living.
Plus, like me and Ben are like living 150 miles apart from each other as well, so it doesn't make social engagements. We only see each other at gigs.
Yeah, and I can't drive, so that's a bit of a pain.
Do you not do any kind of rehearsal then at all?
No, we went through after our first tour in years, which was last year. We did a couple of rehearsals up in Leeds.
Right.
That was only because we added a choreographed dance routine into it.
That's what I was referring to.
And to be fair, we'd not done a gig for about 3 years, had we? So, or 2 years or something. So, we did 1 or 2 rehearsals when we first started the band, but then after that, they're not difficult songs, and we were gigging about twice a week for a good solid 3 or 4 years. So, and we're not really playing much new material anyway, so it's not difficult.
Right. So for the concept, because for this audience is primarily obviously people who've been following the Roadrunner project, right? So I need to kind of introduce Petrol Bastard as a concept. I think like now it's fair to say, punk, because the compartmentalization of genres isn't exclusive to guitar music or non-guitar music anymore. But I want to throw this out there because I think it's probably the most accurate way to describe it. Morecambe and Wise punk. I think that's about right, because I think I've had to listen to Ben try and describe it when you started, and it was like you couldn't do it. But I don't know, has your understanding changed or your way of describing it?
I mean, I think that's perfect. I think can we have that?
Yeah, if you want.
It's what do we say?
Richie and Eddie punk.
Yeah, Tesco value prodigy, isn't it?
That was what it started out as, and I see where that's come from. But when you see the live show, it's like this is a different spectacle.
Mm.
I was saying this to Cunt, and we were saying like considering where it came from, which was basically Ben just shitface, just smashing people into monitor risers and stuff like that, and just screaming at the audience. It seemed to be like the methodology was there has to be a healthy amount of disdain for the audience in order to create kind of personas and kind of create a stage presence. But now it's sort of evolved into, no, you can kind of build an interesting spectacle around this without the need for violence or bodily fluids.
Yeah.
I think Ben will probably agree with this. When we look back at what we were doing years ago, when we were just drunk all the time and it was all about attacking the audience, I think looking back at it, it was a bit dark and worrying, really. And in retrospect, we're thinking we were probably a couple of proper dickheads, and we've got older since then, obviously. And I think now we've kind of started to really enjoy the positive side of things. So even the music has got more positive messages now, and trying to appeal to. If you look at the demographic of the audience, it used to be young, white, scary men that had quite disturbing views on life. And if you look at it now, we're seeing more females in the audience, which I think is like a good sign that we are kind of seen as a less attacky, worrying sort of a band. And now it's got a broad. We've got a good gay following. We've got more of a party vibe in general. So it's more accessible, I think.
Yeah, just lots of people who feel safe at the gigs, I guess, and enjoy it. Yeah, so that's what we want, really.
Was that born of your decision, or was that an environmental change over the last, say, 5 years?
We never didn't want that, really, but I think we've made a conscious choice to be, less about that, really. It's quite monotonous, isn't it? You can do that sort of thing, that aggressive thing, for a bit, but it's just really boring, and I don't have any anger left at all. Do you know what I mean? Not 24 and drunk, so it's just not. I don't think either of us are angry people at all.
And when you look at bands now that do that kind of thing, it just looks like pointless shock value.
It makes us wince a bit. Yeah.
And like we see bands like that and we go, oh my God, this is really horrible to watch.
But here's the thing, here's the difference between Petrol Bastard and the other shock value stuff, though, because your first sort of video that you put out was called Petrol Bastard a fucking shit. So, and I know there's some there's a no FX angle to that and the self-deprecation, but it was kind of like, and this is kind of my motto with everything that I do, which is like lowered the stakes. You know what I mean? Shock comedians come out thinking they're the dog's bollocks because they do a Savile joke. You know what I mean?
There's a lot of that, isn't there? I think there's a difference between being shocking, sort of mocking yourself in a way.
Yeah.
So you can say shocking things about yourself. There's a difference between that and the sort of lyrics where you're attacking another group of people, which I think is the sort of stuff that makes me cringe a bit. You know what I mean? Yeah. Those sorts of buzzwords that they use. I don't know. Maybe there's not really a difference, but I feel like there might be. I don't think we're ever like really bad. But I think we maybe had a bit less awareness of what we were saying sometimes. I didn't care.
Also, I think it made professional life a little bit harder. I remember when I worked for a company up in Manchester, and at a works party, some guy came up to me and said, "Oh, I heard your band. Don't you sing about killing babies?" And he was referring to that song we had called "Baby in a Bin Bag." And
it's not really about that.
Think, this is worrying that that's the perception of what we're doing. People think that we're into killing babies. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I think you can have an idea behind what your meaning is, but if it doesn't translate well, you failed, haven't you? Because if
you have to explain it, it hasn't translated well. Yeah.
So you have to be a bit aware of what you're saying, and even if you think it's clear, some people will take it at face value, and you don't want to encourage that sort of thinking.
Most people nowadays read just the headlines and get angry about them without understanding the detail, don't they? And you can be a victim of that if you're not careful with song titles. Yeah,
I think what I think is interesting is where we are now compared to where. Because do you remember the first time we met, Ben?
Go on.
So this is where it started. So we went to the cooler, and it was Dan Armstrong that introduced us. So we all sat down with the Fat Crew, and we were all having a drink. And you said, "I don't know why you bother with this pint shit. If you're going to get drunk, you're going to get fucking drunk." And that second, the Leon, who was the barman, just laid down a tray of 12 vodkas in front of you, and you just went duh, 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 and got completely shit-faced on a Thursday night when we had school the next day. So that was
a guy.
But yeah, but when I try and contextualize things with like, you were just getting shit-faced, and you didn't have much practice, and Petrol Bastard was fucking shit. This sort of era was born of that kind of Ben. Yet still, you take that body of work and you tried to mature it into something totally different. There's something you told me somewhat recently, and it just for the audience's benefit, that thing that happens around the greatest hits, where you go the very worst of Petrol Bastard, which takes it filters out all the shit from previously, and you kind of have one coherent album that isn't necessarily the edgy shock value cringe shit. Would you say that was about the time you sort of like had a refresh?
I think just about that time was when you stopped drinking, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was probably to do with it as well, wasn't it? And then also we had that track called Oi Lad, which had a more positive spin, a more positive message. And I really liked how that track landed. I remember overhearing some guys talking about that track at a gig in Manchester, and we were getting changed, and we could hear them through the door, and they didn't know we were listening, and they were talking about, this one guy was saying that Oi Lad was like a track that spoke to him, and he was like, he loved the vibe of it and the way it made him feel, and it gave him this really positive outlook on life. I remember hearing this completely unaware. These guys didn't know we were listening, and I thought, this is the kind of stuff that we want, for me, the kind of stuff that we want people to take away from what we're doing, rather than the old look on the dark side stuff. Let's like bring some light side into it, and kind of, and also I think then you start to form this sort of relationship with your fans, which is more about, let's all move, let's be supportive and help each other move forward and get through life, you know, together in a positive way, rather than whinging and complaining and, you know, being angry at everything, which at the end of the day isn't very productive or creative for anybody.
I think we should talk about Oil Lad for a minute though, because it's the hook on that is like, it's AAA. It's not like, that's not Morecambe and Wise punk. That's almost dipping your toe into like that Prodigy sort of space. Yeah. But then you kind of subvert it. You don't change off it into like a big chorus. You don't change off it into like an A, B, no, like an A, B, C, B, C, D. You don't structure it like that. You still keep it kind of anarchic, and you don't get tempted into conforming to, because it could have been a pop. The way that hook lands, it could have been a pop song.
I think the brass is all Ben's fault, and I fucking love. From the moment I heard that, I loved that. And then I remember somebody saying, two Yorkshire lads making brass dance music, that's perfect. Like that's where you need to go from now on. And even now, I think I keep saying to Ben, the next track, can we put some trumpets in it, or, you know, some brass in it, because it always works. So
I like. I'm a big fan of the KLF, who I think one of them was involved with that project where they got colliery bands to play acid techno tracks with the trumpets and stuff, which I thought was quite good.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that's like directly why we did it, but I think it kind of fits with that whole thing, doesn't it?
Is yours your writing style a train of consciousness though, Ben? So having written with you, I kind of feel like that I have a bit of insight, but that I feel like you come from a completely different place than most of the songwriters, in the sense that I don't think you've got the patience to have an idea and let it rest and then re-deliver it a few months later.
No, like if I write something, it's usually done and dusted and pretty much one sitting. Might tweak it, but yeah, I've got a basic idea of what I want, and then I'm very frantic while I'm doing it, and then yeah, I think it's usually quite an explosive kind of burnout thing for a few hours, and then it's done. And then I'll send it to John, but I'm really, really impatient. So while I'm waiting for that, I'll normally write about 12 other tracks, and maybe one or two of them might survive that. Yeah. And John has to just kind of be like, oh yeah, great. Yeah, thanks. Like, yeah, I'll keep that. And then just let me burn myself out, and we'll come back to the ones that are actually good.
For every 100 bits of music that you write, we tend to use maybe like 10 of them, don't we?
Yeah, if that, yeah.
I think that's the secret, though. No one tells you that.
Yeah, you have to write a lot of stuff, don't you? It doesn't matter. Like, I think Giorgio Moroder said, write 10 tracks. One of them will be good. I'm a big believer in if it's not got something after like an hour, it's probably not worth pursuing. Like, you shouldn't have to force it. So I tend to write a lot of finished tracks very quickly, and then the good ones float to the top.
Yeah. In terms of, but Oil Lad is just, it's sort of a weird cherry on like on the top of like everything you do, because it's so fucking, I keep using the term AAA. It's not mainstream. It's not, because it's so fucking accessible. Because I can picture when you were doing like your touring circuit, because you do a lot of fucking gigs, and you just sort of go apropos of nothing. Here's Petrol Bastard, and it'd just be fucking noise porn. And then half the room would love it, and half the room would be like, what the fuck is this? But that track is like, that could have been like, I say could have been. That, why wouldn't you open with that? You know what I mean? What's the objective? Would you have gone into like a gig and gone, we kind of want to separate the wheat from the chaff from the get-go, so we'll open with Priory Way?
I think that track's better once you've had a bit more of the in your face stuff. I don't think that one's as in your face as some of the other stuff. I think it's good to have a lot of the chaotic stuff up towards the front of the set and then have that towards the back as a kind of bit of a lift for everyone's mood, if you like, at the end.
It's almost a compromise, isn't it? Because I just feel like it's tethered to something, which it feels like it completely it's tethered to something which nothing else is in the song list, and it kind of just demonstrates. But it's so like effortless that it seems so deliberate. It kind of feels like you've always got one foot into almost being. You could be everyone's band if you wanted to be, but that's not fucking fun. So why would you be? And I think that's what that track demonstrates. It kind of goes, we could easily actually be, we could be a fucking Waitrose value prodigy, but we don't want to be that. So we're going to do fuck off instead, as in like the song fuck off. You know what I mean? It feels like, it for me, it just sort of recontextualizes everything. Like it's not just a chaotic accident. There is like a deliberate choice to sort of, you know what I mean? Because I'm going off on one here, but do you know what I mean?
If we could write a song that would suddenly sell millions and we could just sell out and walk away into the sunset with loads of money and not have to work our 9-to-5 jobs again, we would.
Yeah, we've discussed this. We've tried. We actually can't. So we try and make it look like we could just teeter on the edge of that deliberately and walk in that line, but actually never quite get there. Yeah.
Let's talk about like the next steps then, on the basis that when we last spoke about Petrol Bastard, you were saying you're trying to build kind of a scene. Right? That's kind of how you left it in terms of, that's how you vocalize it. What did you mean by that?
So there isn't a lot of stuff like what we do about, or there hadn't been. I actually think there is a lot more stuff. There's a lot of stuff I like that people are doing at the moment. There's a couple of bands like Arch Femesis and Toki Horror who are doing kind of like digital hardcore stuff almost, but like just a few years before that there wasn't a lot of stuff like us, so it's quite isolated and there aren't many bands to play with and there isn't really a fan base to pour things into. You have to kind of struggle to get every person to these gigs, and the friends don't like it and stuff, so they're kind of on their own a lot. So I think we thought it'd be nice to put loads of gigs on and sort of create a vacuum for other bands to sort of pour into, and make it a bit more self-sustaining, so we're not having to literally book all the gigs ourselves and people are doing things independently and there's stuff that sounds a bit like it. I don't think that's because we want anyone else to be successful, especially. It's just it makes it easier for us to sell t-shirts a bit, because there's already an audience.
But didn't the Cunts Talk kind of throw that idea into disarray a bit, because it turns out there's probably an audience out there. It's just that you need to tag along with something established as opposed to trying to break in your own and make your own vacuum. Does that make sense? That's
a really big part of it. And we've done a lot of touring, as you know, over the last couple of years. And we decided recently that this year we're not going to tour. But what we do want to do is try and tag along more with other bands, because the challenge that we've got a lot of the time isn't, when people hear what we do, actually, people do tend to like it. But the problem is being heard in the first place. Yeah. And the Cunts Talk kind of proved to us that if you can give us the platform to get out there to more people, then the return is pretty good on that. It's just reaching those people. In some fantasy land, if we could go on tour with The Prodigy or something like that, then I think we could realistically have a shot at making a real career out of what we're doing. But reaching those people is really, really tough.
One is reaching that. It's interesting how the question's gone from who would listen to Petrol Bastard and what's their local flat roof pub where we can play, to who would endorse the idea of Petrol Bastard and let us ride on the coattails on their next run. Yeah. It's an interesting kind of a flip-flop, isn't it?
Well, I think it's, just going back to what John said a bit, like, people do tend to enjoy it. Like, it sort of surprise. Like, we get people saying all the time, "Oh, I didn't think I'd like that at all, but actually, it was really fun, and I'd listen again." So, like, the Rebellion Punk Festival is a good example. Punks are normally pretty open-minded anyway, but that was a really big crowd, the biggest we'd played to at that point, and yeah, just put us in front of a much bigger audience than we were not, used to. And it just demonstrated again that if we can get in front of the right people, but a lot of people do enjoy it. So there must be something in it.
Hmm.
It's just working out how to get to that next level. That's the puzzle.
What's the level, what's the ratio between frustration and fascination with the process?
I'm not frustrated at all because, like, it's not our job. It doesn't really matter. It's fun. Even doing the smaller gigs is still fun. So wouldn't say frustration, but
One conversation that Ben and I had quite recently was that if our 15-year-old selves had have known what we were going to achieve with Petrol Bastard, we'd have been massively in awe of it. The fact that we can go on tour on our own tours and get big crowds coming along. I think that we are suffering from the same thing that anybody suffers from, which is that when you reach the next level in life that you're aiming for, you don't rest, you don't sit back and think I've made it. Instead, you strive for the next, and the current level you're at always feels too small. And and it's the same in in your working life. You get promoted, and you think that that's going to solve all your problems. You earn more money, you get a bit more respect. But when you get there, it feels like you're just now back in the same rat race, looking for the next level. And that's what we're guilty of with the music as well. But it's not, like as Ben says, it's not frustrating, I don't think, because the lucky thing here is that we really enjoy it and we have a great time when we go out gigging. Meeting people is for me, one of the best things about it. It's never a waste of time, except for maybe that one time in Newcastle where like 5 bald fat men turned up and nobody else.
Yeah, all of my dads. Although even that probably was fine, like even a gig like that just adds to your gig patina, doesn't it? And like,
Yeah.
you can refer back to that and in a big list of gigs, and people will probably think it was they'll probably think it was good. So in terms of leverage for getting more gigs, you can still use it as an example of all the successful gigs you've played, really, can't you? So,
I did worry that when we did our striptease, we're just going to get beaten up outside.
yeah.
We've talked about the journey so far. We've talked about the next steps and sort of like how you're trying to articulate the audience versus the brand versus the sound and all that stuff. Now, this is the thing I've wanted to speak to both of you about for fucking ages. Ben, why are you not bothered about a label? Because that's purely, I've got thoughts on this as well, because I've obviously now got a fucking myriad of experiences with labels from the last 2 years.
Can you get us onto Roadrunner?
No, no fucking can get onto Roadrunner. Roadrunner is a completely different beast these days.
Because I don't think a label is necessarily the right way to go. We don't really release a lot of music, probably not enough to sustain being on a label. I think what we need is decent management to get us gigs. So I think people don't really buy a lot of music anymore. That's just a fact. You make you make the living aspect of it out of selling merch at gigs and stuff like that. And I think a label, unless it's a really big one, is kind of redundant at the moment. I mean, there's a bit of cross-pollination between, the bands on the label, I guess, a bit. But if it was a small medium label, which is the kind that is more likely to take us on, I'm not sure what they could bring to the table that we can't do ourselves. That I wouldn't do.
Absolutely fucking right. So this is kind of like how I've delineated labels from the last 2 years of having to effectively study them. So you start off with your most common label, which is the ones that will probably be in your inbox right now, which is, I call them laptop labels, which is one person who just likes the idea of having a label, but offers fucking nothing else on top of that. They might have gone on Fiverr.com and paid for someone to do them a logo, and and they'll do some PR for you, but that's really it. And that's
I think our experience of those kind of labels has been that they're generally vanity labels. So actually, there's no money in them anyway.
And
it's not even about the money, because what you need is the resources that a label has isn't necessarily money. It's usually a network of people. And unfortunately, the only ones that have any leverage is like an old boys club. So like the only laptop labels who would give a shit is like a one-man PR company. Somebody typically used to be A&R in the 90s or something like that. That's the only one with any kind of leverage on anything. That's one. Then you have like your medium enterprise label, which is an indie label, which has some money, but it usually deals in like one kind of track of artist, right? And there's not a lot of those, because that's kind of like the weird sort of, I don't know if there's an analogy, like it's the independent pub, and it's the independent high street pub of yesteryear. before it either shuts down or gets eaten up by Whitbreads or Weatherspoons or something like that. And typically they're really good, like that's what people might have regarded Roadrunner as, just by way of example, like sort of like late 80s, early 90s. It's kind of like, this is the home for this kind of thing. Money's not always amazing, but you know you've got the right network of people that can push the product. And then we go up into like the majors, which is effectively an all boys club or old boys club, a revolving door of people, and that's where people tend to, you know, you get on those if you get 1 million streams, because there's no A&R development. It's just, all right, this band has 2 million streams, get them in. That's kind of like the rotation of it. So I think for something like Petrol Bastard, it's like, the idea isn't viable unless you have someone who's in that sort of sweet spot. But the interesting thing is there's no one issue label that can do what Petrol Bastard do.
I think, lots of the benefits of being on a label in the past were things like them paying up front for your recording and, mastering and physical production and distribution of media. But that wouldn't really apply to us because we produce everything ourselves. And so that's one thing they can't help us with. I don't think people really buy that much physical music. That's another thing they can't help us with. I just think it would restrict us more than it helped us.
It creates more admin because you're dealing with more people. The money that bands make now is all on merch and all on touring, which is why there's such like a massive dialogue about the amount of cut that the venue takes on merchandise and how much like Ticketmaster make on their service fees and things like that. Because it's completely ripping the industry apart, really, when there's probably really viable options out there to make all that go away in like this digital age where you're not getting money from the masters or from the physical sales, but no one's taking the bold steps to do it. And I don't have any big sort of grandiose ideas of what those are, but I do know that Petrol Bastard follow the model of the money's in t-shirts and the physical product you put out on the merch desk, isn't it?
I think seeing other bands like the Cunts and Cunt and the Gang do very well without a label at all, having never had a label. Nothing's leading me to think it would be a benefit. There's plenty of people doing it without a label, but far bigger than us who are just happy, so it would take a lot.
One thing what we are doing, and probably what Cunt and the Gang did as well, I think, is not trying to do gigs right now in order to make money. It's trying to build a really firm foundation so that eventually you might be able to reach a point where you can monetize it. If Cunt and the Gang releases another t-shirt tomorrow, you know that he's going to sell 500 to 1,000 of those and he's going to turn around a good few grand profit, and he can do that because he's built a foundation of really solid die-hard fans.
It's a strong brand. That's like the dickhead way of saying it.
Yeah, and I don't think you build a strong brand by trying to monetize your fans early on. You need those people to stick with you and to feel like they're kind of they're respected as being fans of yours. You don't want to rip those people off, because they're the ones who, in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, are going to say, "I was there at the beginning, and they've always been a good band. Met them a few times, and they're good lads, and now they're getting somewhere. I'm proud to support them."
Most of the time, my music was free. I think it is for sale on Bandcamp now, but the idea was always to just try and get people into it. So if that meant giving it away free, fine. What's the point of making 200 quid extra, perhaps, if you're lucky, versus 5,000 people downloading it for free?
Yeah.
You look at the tours that we've done as well. We're actually quite lucky as far as bands go. Most bands would go on a UK tour and lose money after the cost of diesel, the hotels, your kind of sustenance throughout the tour. We've been kind of lucky in that it normally washes its own face. And so we can come back after a week or 2 weeks away and we can say, you know what, we made a load of new fans, we met some great people, we had a really good laugh, and it didn't cost us anything.
And I bought a log burner out of the last one, so that's good.
It was set up, yeah.
It's gone up in smoke. Yeah.
No, fair enough. So, John, we had a conversation like a year or so ago. We were like, we should sort of talk about later, because I was in the running for doing a small label with, with all this in mind. But I was in like the early talks with someone about doing something, But you also wanted to put your hat in the ring as well, didn't you? So what was the idea? That can't be a vanity label if you're calling out vanity labels here in this conversation. What was the thing that you wanted to do with it, or what's your idea?
So the idea at the time, this was before I bought another, like a house, and I had a bit of money that I wanted to do something with, and the idea would be a little bit like we said about building up the foundations of a fan base for the band. It'd be a similar idea, but for a label. So sometimes you come across people who are fans of the label above the band, and people will always buy the records at certain label releases, like Fat Wreck Records, you know, so that on No Effects thing. A big example for me was Digital Hardcore, which is probably folded, I think, a long time ago now. But I was always a fan of pretty much anything that they put out. So you become a fan of this label because you know that it's a quality label based on your preferences. So for me, because we're seeing more of these bands that are doing a little bit nearer to what we're doing, so it's about a really out there performance, it's about almost karaoke, and it's about doing something that's funny and getting out there and just being a bit mad, but also with an electronic kind of feel to it as well.
There is a craft to it. There's absolutely a craft to it.
Yeah, I think you could, and it'd take a long time, but you could build a label around that, and then you could build a real sort of family of bands that
it sounds like what you're saying, and what Ben was saying earlier about creating a vacuum in which you could kind of like have a built-in audience for this kind of thing is what you would have done with
that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it would just given a little bit of control over it to be able to say, if one of the bands on the label is putting a video out, let's have some input into that and just help them make sure that it's the best that they can do. Same with the recordings. I mean, we're kind of lucky to have access to people like, say, like Ben's production skills. He can do mastering. We know people like Dan Buckley, who's fantastic at editing videos and doing animations. We're lucky to know people around the business. And if we wanted, between us, we could pull together a really good kind of hit squad that could just pump out amazing music. All you need is some people with the zest for it and some good ideas, and you can quickly turn them into, I think, a quality product with a decent set of videos and a good sound and a good image. And that was the kind of thinking, really, to have a little bit of creative input just to support and nurture that kind of a scene to build.
Yeah, and I think that's a good idea. We were talking about cunt earlier. Now I was saying the thing I envy about cunt is, and it's a thing I've realized I've been missing this like for most of my life. I don't know if Ben, you can attest to this, but cunt was talking about gels, and he was saying the thing about gels is up for a laugh. Like, you could say that you're off to just walk up Ben Nevis for the shits and gigs, and you'd just walk outside and gels would be at bottom of your drive with a sleeping bag and a Twix. I'm like, those kind of mates are the ones I've completely been missing. Like, I feel like from my entire fucking life. Like, the one thing I've needed on this Roadrunner project is just some other like, I had to, like, you're familiar with Anthrax, the band Anthrax. I had to walk Scott Ian through the center of Leeds on match day to do an interview. I have no one to share that story with because no one else was there. And all I've got is the image in my head of Scott Ian, like, fucking in front of hedgerow with crowds of people. I'm like, just put your hood up, mate. Just keep your head down. I'm trying to get him into a car. But I've got no one to share that sort of story with. But Cunt has it in fucking droves. And it sounds like, John, what you'd want to cultivate is something similar to that. Because the sharing, at the end of the day, I think the inverse of that idea, and I think the real inverse, like the polar opposite, is usually a promotion company that wants to put gigs on in a particular locale. And then it's like, oh, it's five ahead. And then no band ever sees any money. And then, as you know, these things go for about a year. Then the guy gets a bad name and he skips town. That's kind of like the shit you've been, like, we certainly dealt with when we were gigging in our teen years. And I think what you're saying, John, the incentive is completely different because it's about, as you say, having a laugh, being surrounded by people who want to have a laugh and share those kind of experiences.
Yeah, and it's infectious then. And if you can then infect the fan base with that, and then they tell their friends, and it becomes a good party vibe. And people say, get to one of these labels gigs because they always put on a good show. It's always an awesome night. The bands are always quality. It just builds and builds. And again, it comes back to building a good foundation, which one day later in life you might want to do something with to make some way out of it. But that wouldn't be the goal. It'd be to build this really good kind of almost a family vibe label that just had a really good reputation for putting out some good stuff and having a good time.
I think like our age speaks to that as well. 'Cause I think like that's the kind of thing you crave a bit more. I think there's a reason blokes in their 50s and 60s go to pubs to see a local folk band, because it's sort of weirdly accessible and you get that kind of weird community vibe. I guess we're a little bit more impatient.
And deaf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's all I wanted to talk about. That's all I wanted to talk about with you for the last like 2 years, but you've just been fucking ignoring me.
You've got us now. Anything else?
Tell me about the video that you just put out then for Beefy Grandad. That song's an old song, isn't it?
It's 9 years old. Yeah. That song was thrown together after we'd recorded a punk band, and then we had the studio for about like an hour afterwards. Is that right? Have I remember?
No, it wasn't. It was a band that's it was a studio in Batley that was being. It was like a warehouse space in Batley that was being rented out and turned into a studio by some friends of mine that were in a band called Dear Friends, like a indie folk band. It's a couple of guys I used to go to school with, and we said we needed a space to do some recording, and they said you can use our space. And then we did a little bit of recording in there, and you had the idea for the track, Ben. And I said, okay, I said, I know how the words for this track should sound, but I haven't had time to write any lyrics. So let's record words that sound good, and then later on I'll replace them with words that make sense. But we didn't get around to doing that second bit, so we just recorded nonsense words that we thought sounded good. And frustratingly, that is the track that most people like, and it's the most pointless track that we've ever written.
But then we needed because that is one that's, the most successful, if you like. We thought we'd best do a video for it, because the problem is we have a lot of tracks that probably could do with a video, but because of us living so far apart, a lot of them just didn't get it, So what we actually ended up doing is getting someone to do all of it without our involvement, really. Sugar Puff, who's sort of a social media dancing sensation, mainly on TikTok. So we just said, look, can you do us a video? You go out and do it. We won't be in it. Bring it back to us. And that's what we got.
Yeah, weirdly, there's a bit right at the start of the video where he does like a James Bond bit right at the very start. He does a roll, and he's at outside. Is it Trafalgar Square? And one of Country Gang's mates, a guy called Stuart Whiffen, who I think you might have met or you might be meeting, Jim. He was walking past and saw this guy doing a barrel roll outside, like in front of Nelson's column, and then he saw the video and he was like, weird. I was walking past that on Tuesday and I saw the guy, and I thought to myself, that's the kind of shit we used to do.
It's Stu Whiffen. He does a podcast called Off the Beaten Track.
He interviews a lot of interesting people, doesn't he?
He interviews fucking like
real stars.
That's a real You should be on that podcast.
Yeah,
that's what you should be fucking doing.
We're doing. Do you remember? We can probably tell you this. Do you remember that the Hamster Dance song in the late 90s that was like number 4 in the charts and John Peel's Christmas #1?
Oh my god, yeah.
The Cuban Boys. We're doing a track with them.
Is that off record or is that on record?
That's probably on record. I mean, it doesn't come true. We're doing it. Maybe it won't get released, but that's the coolest thing ever.
That's fucking bonkers. I think like.
So this is who Stuart Whiffen is interviewing. David Duchovny from X-Files.
It's on that podcast, or just like.
Yeah, Off the Beaten Track. Yeah, podcast with Stuart Whiffen. Yeah, David Duchovny, Bonnie Tyler recently.
Bonnie Tyler.
Fucking Tyler, Jesus Christ! Actually, I'll tell you about my AAA experience that I've had with the Roadrunner project now.
Yeah.
So, obviously, I did Blackstone Cherry last week. Blackstone Cherry is like a southern rock band, massive over here. I've been with those guys like since like 2006. I fucking love that band. So anyway, I went through management, did everything by the book. Got my AAA pass backstage at Leeds Arena, and the Darkness were supporting. And I fucking love the Darkness. I think like the Darkness from these days is like better than Darkness from before, and I fucking love it. And anyway, I do the interview. The interview is great. And I'm like, can I stick around and like get some of the performance for B-roll? And it's like, yeah, you just can't do it from the stage. You got to be accompanied by someone. Just do it from front of house. I'm like, yeah, banging. But I'm just going to go watch the Darkness. Watch the Darkness. Great performance. Never seen him before, but I really love him. And I was like, I'm gonna just see what this is like. I'm gonna go backstage when they come off stage and just see if it's sort of like they all just go off to the dressing rooms or what. And all four of them came out and they were just joking and joshing, and it was proper, like, really good to see. Like, joking around. Like, that was a great performance. A lot of funny things happened in that one. And then I was like, as soon as the security guards were like giving fist bumps and stuff like that, and I was so like taken aback by it, I actually just put my eyes to the floor and just didn't even acknowledge anything. It was so like, I was like blinded by the light of Justin Hawkins. It was fucking brilliant.
Yeah, awesome band. I've never seen him live, but I've always been a big fan. And I think he went to music college in Huddersfield, the same Huddersfield.
Yeah, he's Soby Bridge alumni.
Huddersfield Tech that I went to.
Hey.
Yeah, he lived in Soby Bridge, Ben.
Did he really? Well, I'm not the most famous musician from Soby Bridge then. There's no little plaque of me in the train station.
But yeah, no, it was crazy. Crazy. Anything else you want to plug? Do you want to just shoot the shit for a bit?
No, I think the only thing to plug might be just it'd be great to get more people to check out the new music video for Beefy Grandad.
And we have a new EP out just last week, but it's forgotten about that because I've been so busy.
Yeah, I know you said earlier, Ben, we don't put much music out, but actually I think we kind of maybe we do. You know,
yeah,
it's
every now and again, isn't it? We don't need to. They're like, the back catalogue's like golden, mate, isn't it? You don't need to.
Are you gonna start getting into a regular rhythm of like putting out new music?
Well, part of the reason we're not gigging this year is to recharge, but also give us a bit of breathing space and maybe get a few extra bits out. We are working on a few bits at the minute. We won't release it unless it's good because there's no need to, but I think we've got quite a few ideas. It's just whether it adds to the live show or not, really, what decides it. There's no point just putting things out for no reason.
I've always thought that about bands sort of as the end, sort of like their 10th, 15th year. Like, it's when this album's not as good as the first. Like, yeah, but if you think about it, it's about giving yourself a more diverse live set, and about having the options to pace things a little bit differently in whatever set you're given. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the stuff that's written now, the end goal of playing it live drives the idea a lot of the time. This will sound amazing on a big sound system in a club is kind of the end goal, isn't it? This will give the audience something interesting to sing along to, rather than for the sake of it just being out. We've done a lot of music in the past that we just can't perform live. It just doesn't work live. It's like the lyrics are too complicated, or the timing it just doesn't work.
And it's ones we thought, some of them are ones we thought would be good live, but you learn through experience what doesn't work. You need actually quite a lot of space in tracks for it to translate well live. If it's too cluttered and there's too many words going on, and it's just an onslaught, it can be it doesn't work well live. It has no impact. It's just like white noise. So I think we've learned what doesn't work. It's good to have those tracks as like album tracks, if you like, if you can believe anyone sits and listens to it. But yeah, there's no need to make more of that. We've kind of got that.
But also on that point, what you were saying earlier, Jim, about where we position Oilad in the middle of the set, a lot of where the tracks sit in the set, they're carefully thought out for kind of two reasons. One of the reasons is that we want to kind of follow a little bit of a journey so that the set doesn't just become all the same. So there's there's a lot of dynamics in there. But the other reason is that we just need breathing room as well. So after a fast track, we sometimes need a slow track where we can get our breath back, because we've done it before where we've come off stage and been literally shaking because you couldn't get your breath for the last two songs, and you give so much that it kind of tips you into feeling really ill at the end of the show because you've not allowed yourself to recover.
If the audience has made it this far in, it's worth noting that the Petrol Bastard live show is completely departed from what you think you're going to see when you listen to the records. It's eclectic. It's high energy. It's eclectic. It's completely. This is why I say it's a Morecambe and Wise punk. That's where that's coming from.
I think it is variety. No, I think it is on the cusp of variety. We'd always, when we decided to do a different sort of set than what we used to do pre-2019, we did sort of want to have a variety of things and, a bit of physical comedy, if you like,
But it is literally like the Royal Variety Show now as well. Like there's a stage fight scene in there, and there's a massive fart.
Yeah, it's Victorian music hall, but digital, isn't it? Digital music hall is what we should call it.
Music hall.
So you did have a fixation with a particular kind of organ.
Wurlitzer, or cinema organs, yeah.
Yeah, and you only wanted to play gigs with those or something like that.
Well, like, if I get rich, I'm just going to buy either a fairground organ or like a massive theatre organ, and I can only play in venues then which have those facilities. There's probably about 12 places, and maybe churches in America.
Yeah.
You probably wouldn't be receptive to the general vibe.
Ben's only interested if there's a big organ.
Yeah, that's right.
How do you look back on our gents days then, Ben? For the context, we used to play in a band called the Volatile Gentlemen.
I don't very often.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I think it was by and large quite bad music, as every band is. Yeah, but you know what? Actually, it was really fun, and we did try and have fun, and we made some quite. I think compared to a lot of bands of young boys, it was quite interesting and quite experimental. It wasn't good, but it's certainly formative.
I definitely look back very nostalgically, and I think the best stuff was, as interestingly as you're saying before, when we were out of patience with burnout, the best stuff we wrote was sort of just blitzed through in 20 minutes.
Yeah, stupid stuff.
Yeah.
I thought it was at its best when it was just the big friendship group around it, and it was all really stupid, and it didn't matter, and the music was really weird. I think when we started to try and take it more seriously, that's when it went kind of not as good in a way.
I sometimes think the best gig we did was the one in London when
the speaker caught fire.
You and Kemp, me and Nick were in Manchester, and then Aaron was going to pick you up and from Leeds and come over to Manchester to pick us up. And you were late, and me and Nick were like, they're probably fucking hammered. They're probably hammered, and they're going to make a right pig's fucking ear of the whole thing. It's just unbelievable. Going down to London, they're going to be shit-faced. Within 2 hours, we were all completely cunted on the back of this bus. We did the gig, and the fucking monitor set on fire. It was ace. The whole thing was glorious.
It was one of the worst gigs ever. I said something quite offensive that I thought was funny, and there was this group of people at the front of the stage just shouted, "Oh, do better," and just walked out. And I was like, oh shit. Rubbish.
I have this really vivid memory of on the way back. I remember we stopped because we hadn't eaten anything all day, and I remember getting the only 65p tuna sandwich in all of London and possibly Christendom.
Yeah, I remember we lined up 16 Jaeger shots at the bar just before going on. That was good.
Remember where was that gig?
There was at the Unicorn, I think. Which we've played at, John, haven't we, a couple of times?
Yeah, I walked past that a couple of days ago, and I was like, "Oh, I remember playing there." That was a messy one. That was a drunk one for us, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. But you had what do you think about your Tetsuo?
Probably a bit like you. It wasn't serious, and it was crazy, and it was probably looking back on it. That's where I think, and again, probably like you. That's where you kind of make you do a lot of your testing. It's like a test bed for what works for a live show, what doesn't work. So I learned doing that kind of thing, how to be on stage and how to feel comfortable and normal, and how to engage with the audience in a way that makes sense. Whereas to get to that point, you have to realize that looking at your band members doesn't work. Apologizing for mistakes doesn't work. Just act like it was meant to happen and plow on. So for me, I learned a lot of lessons doing that before then. Me and you started working together. We all got that, both of us out of the way.
And we actually did write on. I think we wrote a physical manifesto on paper that included things like, when we're performing, don't look at each other, no chatting in between the songs.
That was a gents thing as well. No on stage banter because it always falls flat and you look like a twat.
Not good. We did a manifesto to try and be sort of good, and it was also sort of for a joke, but a lot of those rules were quite sensible, practical rules, like doing repetitive songs we won't forget, just how to be on stage, always looking at the audience, not at each other, and those things have put us in reasonably good stead.
One of the strong ones was just having that idea of having maybe just one good line that you repeat over and over and over again, because that becomes part. If you mix that with a really good musical hook, that becomes a real earworm, and that gets people, days after they've heard a track, still singing it to themselves, and that's what really plants the seed and gets people coming back. And we still do that, don't we? We still use that rule a lot.
Minimalism. It's sort of like the tracks are quite full, but they're driven by minimalism, aren't they? Really?
Yeah. And that's where the craftsmanship is, though, isn't it? It's being able to go, can I get as much of myself in this while also trying to make it as hooky as possible?
Yeah.
Without also compromising the bit of me in there.
Ben and I are both big fans of Daft Punk, and when you listen to the Discovery
Around the World, stuff like that.
Around the World, anything like that, it's just repetitiveness to the point where instead of it getting boring, it becomes like you learn.
Yeah,
that's it. And I think we kind of knowingly used that trick to try and drill the tracks into people. Oi Lad, again, is a perfect example of that. It's just that same hook over and over again. It's got a little shit rap near the beginning, but apart from that, which is designed to just break it up, but then it takes you back to the really comfortable hook, and that it reintroduces it in a way that people have already learned it. And I think it actually works quite well.
It's so I'll keep going about Oi Lad, but there's so much space in that song. I don't know if it's in the mix or something like that, but and when you keep coming back to speeding up and things like that, it's like there's so much space, yet we're tunnel visioning it. You know what I mean? It's sort of weird.
I'd sort of tack on that. It's not so much deliberately because I like Stuart Lee, but I think Stuart Lee, he said something about repetition and making it just saying this sort of same point over and over again makes it hilarious, doesn't it? Because it sort of loses its meaning, and then it stops being funny, and then it starts being really fucking funny again because you just absolutely relentlessly hammering it home. And we do that at the end of our live set as well, don't we? With the it's just an a cappella bit at the end where we just repeat the same thing over and over and over again till it becomes just boring, then uncomfortable, then it becomes really funny again. And I think some of the songs are kind of a micro version of that.
One of the cunt songs I'm obsessed with in the minute is Women Love a Bastard, and I think that speaks to that completely because it's just songs about a guy who receives advice that women love bastards, and it's just verse after verse after verse of relentless cuntery. And then it stops for a little bit, and he's like, "Oh, and then she left me," and then I continue being the
probably my favorite Cunt of the Gang track is that one and Paperboy.
Paperboy for me, they're all good, aren't they? But yeah, Paperboy. And I think Butterfly, that's a good one.
Butterfly is another amazing one as well.
If Women Love a Bastard was 2 BPM slower, you'd get bored of it. If it was 2 BPM quicker, you wouldn't be able to keep up with it. It's kind of just perfect, exactly the way it's been delivered.
He's a very good tunesmith.
Surprisingly, considering the packaging.
They sound like something Raymond Scott would do for a 1950s toothpaste commercial, don't they? They're just really tight little earworms.
Yeah.
With almost nothing to them that are just right. That's
really well on kids' cartoons, I think, as well. Because it sounds like it's being done on toy instruments.
Yeah.
And you can put it on something from when I was a kid, like Playbus, where they just have these really minimal, daft instruments with nice little jingles.
Yeah.
You can just write them. You can just ream them off easily.
It translates so well to punk as well.
Surprisingly so, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's better, actually. I wasn't initially I liked them. I liked the Cunts, but I wasn't initially this is better. But now that I've seen it live a few times, I'm absolutely convinced that it's loads better. I think they just work so much better like that. But yeah,
I'm dying for a piss.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Yeah, go. Right, cheers, but I'll have this up in a bit anyway.
Nice one. Good chat.
Yeah, have a good one. In a bit.
See you in a bit. Bye bye.